What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Capitalized Podcast. As always, this episode is brought to you by our private lending company, Sharper Capital Partners. If you want to learn more about how Sharper Capital can help you build your real estate investing business, you can check us out at sharpercapitalpartners.com. Today, it is Chris Casella with you, and I have with me September Hall. September is the principal of Plum Title, which is a title company based out of Dayton, Ohio. And September and I actually met because one of our clients at Sharper Capital came to us and they wanted to buy a property from sheriff sale. It was something that we didn't have experience with at the time. And so we went to our client and we said, hey, who's the best title agent or title company that you know of who's knowledgeable, willing to ensure a transfer and a purchase like this? And they recommended September. So September has been extremely helpful and she's super knowledgeable. I'm excited to have her here in September. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really glad to do this. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I think before we get into your background, before we get into some of the finer details, I want to start with something that's relatively simple, or at least it seems that way. And it's something I think a lot of us take for granted when we think about a title company. But what is a title?
I actually think, thank you for asking that most people don't realize what that means. People say it all the time, hear it all the time. Obviously, real estate involves title work, titles. But at its core, like a title is actually just the right of ownership of a piece of real property. So it is recognized and protected by law, and it gives you rights to possess, occupy, enjoy, use that property, dispose of it as you wish. There's lots of terms that go along with that. Title exam, that would be the title search of the property, which is sort of like a blueprint that goes back 42 years. And we look at everyone who's owned the property, if they had the right to transfer it when they did, if they got divorced, we look at their divorces, their probate cases, liens, mortgages, all of that. And another thing people often say is they hold title to the house. When you hold title, essentially you own it. The way that title is conveyed would normally be through a deed. And not most, but a lot of people call deeds titles. But a deed is an instrument of conveyance that conveys title. You can also obtain title through court order. In a divorce, in a probate, in a mortgage foreclosure or tax foreclosure. You can also acquire title to a property by operation of law, like eminent domain, states, municipal government jurisdictions can come in and take a piece of your property for whatever they might need it for.
And that's super interesting because I've thought about this and I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of title, but hearing it laid out like that is really helpful. And if I can just kind of take a stab at summarizing, basically, title is a right of ownership, like you were saying. And that right of ownership is conveyed by a physical, tangible piece of paper called a deed, which is then recorded with the county that the property is located in.
Absolutely. And everyone's goal when they buy a property would typically be to hold fee simple interest in that property. And essentially, that is the highest level of ownership you can have. It is the unqualified power of disposition. It has the unqualified power of disposition, but it's still subject to easements, mortgages, liens, etc.
And I'm sure that there's more to this, right? And I know that for a fact, but before we get into some of those details, because I think we can kind of cover some of that in a follow-up question. What is a title company? So we think about Plum Title, which is where you are, and that's your company. Why is a title company like Plum Title so important for real estate investors and people in general when they're thinking about real estate?
A title company is an independent, disinterested third party. And I think a lot of times people think that title companies work for the buyer, for the seller. We actually just work for the contract. It's our job to make sure the terms of the contract are carried out by all parties involved. So it is our job to make sure both the buyer and the seller sign all of the documents they need to sign. It is our job to collect the money from the buyer and distribute that money accordingly to the seller, to any liens. So in that aspect, we're an escrow agent. Separately from that, we also do the title exam, run the search, make sure that the purchaser of the property is able to get clear title, and then we issue title insurance to whomever in the transaction would like to have it, whether they are a fee simple purchaser, if they are a land contract purchaser, the lender gets title insurance to ensure their lien position.
Yeah. And one of the things that we touched on before we started the show is just how many things can actually pop up when you're going through a real estate transaction. And it's not something I have to tell you because I know that you're more than familiar. But what are some of the problems that people can run into? And I know you've already touched on a couple of them, but what are some of the problems that people can run into when they're buying a home, for example?
Well, I mean, from a purchaser standpoint, or from a purchaser standpoint, if you're buying a home and you're an investor like an entity, the biggest problem we see is they don't have their entity docs in order. So if you want to buy something in the name of an LLC, make sure that LLC is registered, that it is an active business, that you have an operating agreement or other document allowing whoever you want to sign those documents. And then the other issue that can come up with buyers is that they have not prepared potentially for closing costs. So they might think that, they're buying a property for $50,000, they're going to have to show up with $50,000. And they don't account for anything outside of that. Buyers also can have some liens that affect their ability to get clear title to a property. Some liens acquired after attached properties or after acquired property. So if a buyer has a federal tax lien or a child support lien, for instance, that would present a title problem for them as soon as they own a property.
Yeah. And this is a topic that I called September about not too long ago, because quick side note here, we were going through a closing with one of our clients, and we had already purchased a property in a different state, and then we were looking to buy a property, to loan on a property in Ohio, and some sales tax liens appeared on the title exam that was run when we were going through closing. And so it was my first time experiencing something like that, and I became a little bit alarmed trying to figure out which position these sales tax liens were going to take, if they were going to attach to this new property, if they were going to be in a priority position above our lien position. So there's a lot of things that I was trying to figure out, but September cleared the air for me and made me feel a lot more at ease. So September, can you kind of talk about that? I know this is a very specific topic, but I think it's one that's interesting. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
absolutely. And this comes up a lot with investors specifically, because an investor is typically a person or a few people, individuals, and then they also have sometimes LLCs or corporations that they form, sometimes multiple LLCs or companies. So liens attach only in the county they're recorded in or filed in. So if you own a property in Hamilton County and someone files a lien against you in Butler County, that lien does not attach to the property you own in Hamilton County. However, at any point in time, that lien holder could certify their lien in Hamilton County, and then it would attach. But also, it's only going to attach on the name of the entity actually owning the property. So if you are John Smith and you have a company called Smith Rentals LLC, and Smith Rentals is the owner of the property, but I file a lien against John Smith, the individual, that does not attach to the property. I would have to have a lien against Smith Rentals in order for it to create a title problem.
And there are multiple types of liens. So is this only relevant to, let's say, for example, tax liens, or is it relevant to all different kinds of liens like mechanics liens, et cetera?
All different kinds of So mechanics liens are a little bit different because they usually apply to a specific property, like they contain the legal description, et cetera. Most liens, except for mortgages, and mechanics liens, are either certificate of judgment liens, or recorded liens, like state of Ohio unemployment liens, federal tax liens, and they are more broad in that they apply and attach to every piece of property you own in the county where that lien is filed. But
Yeah.
most liens do not attach to after acquired property. So if I file a lien against you today and next week you go buy a property and your deed to that property records 2 weeks from now, my lien doesn't attach unless I'm like a federal tax lien or child support. Some liens are super liens and they supersede everything.
Right. And that was one of the big distinctions that really helped me understand and navigate the situation that we were going through, because there was 2 degrees of separation here. One was that the tax liens that we were facing were against an individual, and he was buying properties in an entity. And these liens were also filed a long time ago. And all these properties fell into the category of after acquired. And so they didn't actually attach. These liens didn't attach to the new properties. The only exceptions, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, September, are IRS liens. So that's federal government, Department of Justice, and then Child Services. Is that the 3 that you were thinking of?
Yeah. So a federal tax lien is what the US files, like if you don't pay your income taxes, for instance. Child support liens filed by the state for non-payment of child support. And then there's also like an anti-terrorism lien, which hopefully you don't run into that. But those also attach to after acquired property.
Okay.
But those are certainly not as common as a federal tax lien or a child support lien.
Sure. So the next piece I want to get into here is I want to circle back to something that you were talking about, the types of ownership, right? Fee simple interest, and there are others as well. Can we kind of chat through some of the different types of ownership and kind of the levels, right? Fee simple interest was number 1, and then what kind of comes after that?
Well, fee simple interest is really what anyone should be getting if they're buying a property. And it doesn't matter if you're buying a property as an individual, as an entity, in partnership with someone else, like your goal should be to get fee simple interest in the property, which is a little sort of related, but unrelated, or not the same as. If you are buying a property with your spouse or with your business partner, you could also do like a survivorship deed. You could be joint tenants where you each own 50-50. You could have rights of survivorship. So if something happens to one of you, the other person automatically gets it by operation of law. So you don't have to go through probate. So there's different types of title that way. But most of the time, like if with investors specifically, we're seeing them take title as an LLC. And so there would be no right of survivorship, et cetera, because that's not a natural person, right? It's a company.
Awesome. Yeah. And again, there's a lot of different rabbit holes to go down here. That's super helpful to hear that, though, just the different types of ownership. And going back to the beginning of our conversation and understanding what title is versus what a deed is and how it all kind of connects. Again, it's kind of like when I first learned way back in the day what a note versus a mortgage versus a property was, right? The note attaches the mortgage to the property, or vice versa. The mortgage attaches the note. And so all these different moving pieces are really helpful to understand.
Yeah. And it's funny that you said that. The way that I always learned that was the note is the promise to pay. The mortgage makes the property collateral for the note. So like the loan is really the note. The mortgage is really the real estate.
And this stuff, again, it sounds so simple, but it's stuff I feel like a lot of people take for granted because it's verbiage that's thrown around. And I had a conversation with somebody not too long ago where they asked me that question one-on-one because they didn't want to ask it in front of a group of people after I was speaking. And I was like, no, it's not something to be embarrassed about at all. I think a lot of people are kind of throwing words around without fully understanding what they mean because there is so much.
Absolutely. And I think that I wish more people were open with like saying that they don't know or asking those questions, because even though, people who have been doing this for a long time talk about it every single day and it makes total sense to us, all of us had to learn at some point in time. Nobody's just born knowing the difference between a note and a mortgage, or the difference between, a general warranty deed or a deed of trust or whatever. And a lot of times, I would say one of the biggest things I see with newer investors, or at least investors that maybe aren't that seasoned, is that they don't want to admit that. So we will have somebody call and say, hey, I got this under contract, whatever. And for whatever reason, seem to feel the need to say, oh, I've done 20 this month, or we do this all the time. And I'm going to treat you differently in that scenario. I'm not going to hold your hand. I'm not going to walk you through the process. I'm going to assume if you bought 20 pieces of real estate last month, you know what to expect. But if you say, hey, we haven't done this a lot, or this is our first time buying in this county, or, we bought some property, but it's been a couple of years ago, I'm going to make a mental note and I'm going to do a lot more explaining throughout the process. And I always encourage people to ask questions. Like, if you don't know, don't be embarrassed. I mean, the only way to learn is to ask. So get a mentor, get a good title company that you trust, a good private lender, whatever, and just be honest about that.
Absolutely. And it's impossible to avoid all mistakes, but it's much better to learn by asking a question than it is to learn by being burned by something because you didn't ask early in the process.
Absolutely. And I mean, for instance, just recently, like within the last week or two, had an agent that we work with send me a message that said, hey, my lender told me that I should never tell my clients to get an owner's title insurance policy, because if they have a loan, the lender gets a policy and it's the same thing. That's not the same thing at all. And if you don't know and you don't ask, you're potentially giving really bad advice to a client, not to mention making really bad decisions for yourself. So ask, always ask.
For sure. That's a great transition because that's where I was going next anyways. I wanted to talk about what is title insurance, and a perfect example here as well. What's the difference between, let's say, an owner's policy and a lender's policy?
So as you would imagine, an owner's policy covers an owner, a lender's policy covers a lender. So they're a little different, but both of them are title insurance policies. They're a little different because I think people are used to paying like homeowners insurance once a year or paying their car insurance every month. This is a one-time purchase. You just pay for it when you buy the house or when you get a loan on a house, and it covers you for the entire time that you own the property. In some situations, if you should become deceased and your heirs inherit the property, that coverage passes to them also. An owner's title policy will protect you from several things. Anything that could have been missed on the title exam, which you never want to happen, but always is a possibility because no one is perfect. So if we run an exam or our abstractor runs a search for us and he misses a lien or a deed that lacked marital status from 20 years ago, you're covered for that. But it also covers you, and people don't realize this, for things that can't be discovered in a title exam. So for instance, if I'm looking at a chain of title for the last 42 years, everything to me appears to be perfectly in order. John Smith owned the property in, 1994. And in 1996, he deeded that property over to Jane Doe. Everything on its face looks good. Someone can come back next year and say, hey, when John Smith signed this deed, he was 14 years old. Well, I would never know that, but he doesn't have the right to own a property or sell a property if he's 14. So now you got a title problem. And if you have a title insurance policy, that policy will protect you from that. If there's litigation involved, it will step in and handle all of it. So you are in a position where somebody makes a claim, somebody says they have some sort of right or interest to your house, you call your title insurance company and say, deal with this. And same for a lender. I mean, on the lender side, it's essentially protecting your lien position. So it will make sure that you're in first lien position, et cetera.
And there's two follow-ups I have here. One is similar to what you were talking about, or at least along the same lines. Some owners or some almost owners think to themselves, and this isn't just title insurance, this is just an insurance thing in general, think to themselves, oh, well, that'll never happen to me, or, oh, we'll never run into that problem, and I don't want to pay the, $500 or whatever, that title company is charging for their insurance coverage. I just want to hear, and I think it's helpful for other people to hear from someone like yourself who has experienced this stuff. What are some things that you've seen come up that have caused some owners trouble?
Well, so one thing to remember, and I don't think people realize this, like if you have owned a house for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and no one has come to you with a problem, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to not run into a problem when you go to sell it. But lots of times I'm actually dealing with 2 properties right now. The first property is a real estate investor. I'm not sure how this transfer went down. He bought a house from someone. He did not use an attorney. He did not use a title company. They did everything sort of themselves, recorded the deed. He took title. He rehabbed the property. He listed it for sale. He then got a contract. Someone was going to purchase it. It came to us. We ran an exam. His entire title was a fraud. The person who owned the property previously did not sell it to him. He thought they did, but he didn't know. So not only has he bought a house he can't sell and rehabbed and put all of this money into it, he's now got to go to the extra expense of litigation to try to actually get clear title to a house he thought he owned. We also have another one going on right now with a seller who ran his title exam. He's got 3 deeds in his chain of title that are precluding him from selling the house. One is a probate issue, one is a dower issue. I don't remember what the other one is offhand, but when I called him and said, do you have a title insurance policy? Because that would be very helpful for us to get this corrected now. He said, oh, no, I didn't buy that. I knew where it was coming from. But you don't know what's out there. So just because you know someone, like you could have a title problem, it doesn't mean that the person you bought it from was trying to do anything dishonest. They may not know. And that's really what it comes down to. Like, we just don't know what we don't know. So until somebody digs into it, you don't know if you're going to need it, and you don't know if it's going to happen to you. We always hope it won't, but in the event it will, it's probably worth that, $500 or whatever the minimal one-time charge is to protect you on a pretty big investment.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it like you said, it could be something completely unrelated to the person who's selling you the property. And this is something I keep going back to, but there are so many different possibilities of things that can come up when transferring a property or working on a property or doing anything in real estate. And so I think that initial, investment, paying for a policy is something that's non-negotiable for us, at least at Sharper Capital. We always say owners and lenders policy. But that's helpful to hear. The second piece here that I wanted to bring up was from a lender's policy perspective, and maybe it works the same way from an owner's policy, but there are some things that are not covered in a typical policy. And there's endorsements that are possible to get tacked on to the coverage that do help cover that. So if we can obviously there's a lot of different endorsements and different details here, but if we can cover generally some of the endorsements or some of the things that aren't normally covered but can be supplemented.
Sure. So I'm going to break that down into 2 separate things, because while there are endorsements for both owners and lenders policies, very rarely do we see purchasers request endorsements on an owner's policy. But there are 2 separate types of owner's policies that they can choose from. There's a standard owner's policy, which is what most people get. Just for reference, the state of Ohio governs all title insurance rates. So owner's policies are $5.75 per thousand. Starting, there's a sliding scale. I won't go into all that. And that is sort of general coverage that everyone expects. But then there's also an expanded Eagle policy. So it's called a homeowner's policy. And if you get the expanded policy, the premium is 15% higher, but it covers post-policy things, which a regular title insurance policy would not cover. So a regular title policy is going to cover anything that happened up until the time you own the property. An expanded policy can cover post-policy forgery, post-policy encroachments to your land, permit and zoning violations, things like that. Now, a drawback for the investor community is that that type of policy is only applicable, it's only available to actual natural people. So if you're an LLC, you can't get it. And then on loan policies, there are literally on both types of policies, there's hundreds and hundreds of endorsements. And sometimes we have people request endorsements I've never heard of, and I've got to go look in a manual and see what they are and how we do it. But there's some pretty common ones. So like lots of times we will see lenders request survey endorsements. They want to make sure the building is in the boundary lines of the property, et cetera. Mechanics liens endorsements, because mechanics liens are retroactive. Then there is a EPA endorsement that covers environmental things like below the surface of the ground. What else? Comprehensive, and well, it's called a comprehensive endorsement. People call it that. It's called an Alta 9. Technically, it's not comprehensive, but it does offer some additional coverages. But I mean, you can get coverage to make sure the address is what you think it is, to say that it's a single parcel or multiple parcels. You can have endorsements as a lender because you've got an adjustable rate note and you want to make sure your adjustable rate interest is covered in the event you ever have a title claim. There's so many of them.
So many of them. And conversations like this are so helpful. And I always recommend anybody who wants to become a private lender or who wants to get involved in real estate, have a conversation with someone like you, September, or an attorney, just to kind of get the basics, right? And absolutely.
Yeah. I think sometimes lenders, especially private lenders, will make the decision to get or to not get an endorsement only because it's what they're used to doing. But they don't really know if they did get that endorsement, what the extra coverage would mean, or if they didn't get the endorsement, if it would be what that would mean. And I don't ever like to recommend endorsements because I'm not an attorney. I don't give legal advice. At the end of the day, it's everybody's individual choice on whether or not they want to get endorsements and which ones. But I'm certainly happy to explain what those endorsements are and what coverage they provide.
Which is incredibly helpful. And it just goes to show the value of working with a great title company and help, highlight the importance of building the right team around you. So I really appreciate that. I want to circle back all the way back to sort of the beginning of your career and what your background looks like, because I think it's really interesting and obviously very relevant to this conversation. So what is your background and how did you end up running your own title company?
So I never would have thought I would end up running a title company, probably all the way up until not long before I did it. I started out my career working at a local real estate law firm in Dayton. We handled foreclosures throughout the state of Ohio. I worked there for 20 years. I managed the firm. And it's really where I learned everything I know about real estate, about titles, about title problems that come up. Because when you're doing a foreclosure, you are seeing all of the things that the title company who closed that loan missed. And I realized there's a lot of stuff out there. Eventually, Laredo and Laredo was my law firm, the law firm that I worked for. And it sold to a multi-state firm that handled foreclosures in, I think, 17 states. I backed away from the firm at that point, along with the managing partner. We both sort of stepped away. I took the closing business with me and created Plum Title independently. So in the foreclosure world, we started doing titles. Well, titles are an integral part of the foreclosure, but we started doing closings mainly on REOs. So on properties that went through foreclosure, went to the sheriff's sale, the bank bought them back. Now they've got to sell them. So we were used to doing REO closings, and we kind of got a little investor following, I guess, where investors would call and say, hey, you guys are the only firm I like to buy foreclosures from because I know there's not going to be a title problem. Can you do all of my closings? Like, do you only do foreclosures? And it kind of grew from there. So by the time the firm sort of transitioned into something different, there was enough title business to just be a separate company.
Wow. You were building kind of a tribe before you even knew you were building a tribe just by doing good business.
Yeah, I mean, but totally unintentionally. I mean, I have always wanted to do a good job no matter what it is I'm doing. And we had just a really awesome team at the firm. And a lot of those people are now at Plum too. So it was very important when we made that transition. Like, the whole purpose was that we didn't want anybody to be out of a job. So we had made a deal. I say we, but I'm not an attorney. I was not a partner in the firm. I was managing the firm. So I was definitely communicating with the partner, and we were talking about how to make this transition work. And the most important thing to both of us was that our amazing staff still had a job. We didn't want to transition to a new company and they fired everybody in 2 months. So then when those people eventually left, it kind of worked that they could come here. So Jenny, who is our current escrow manager, she did confirmation entries and sheriff's deeds for, 15 years. Dana, who is our admin, she did a lot of title work, assignments of mortgage. She prepared sheriff's deeds, things like that. And this was just a real natural transition for that, and a lot happier. People are happier to buy a house than to get foreclosed. So, hey.
Yeah, that's another plus for sure. That's one I didn't even think about. Yeah, it's a great story, and it all makes total sense. And I know I can personally say that I'm glad you're in the business that you're in now because you've been super helpful. So one thing that I do want to touch on is kind of going back to when you're working in foreclosures. What is the difference between a foreclosure auction and a sheriff's sale?
There's no difference. So a foreclosure at the end of Ohio is a judicial foreclosure state, meaning in Ohio, we have mortgages. Those mortgages are foreclosed through a legal process. You file a complaint for foreclosure. The entire thing is presided over by a judge. The judge grants the foreclosure judgment, grants your ability to order a sale. But there are different types of sales, although they really are the same, just a little bit of a different process. So the end result of any foreclosure is an auction. Sometimes that auction is held by the sheriff. Sometimes it's held by a PSO or private selling officer. But it's still the same process, same bidding process, same amounts for deposits, just depends on who's handling it. And PSOs usually have more fees than a sheriff.
Sure. What's an example of a PSO?
So in 2016, I believe, don't hold me to that, there was a House bill passed in Ohio. Prior to that, every foreclosure sale was handled by county sheriffs, and that was the only option. And then there was a group of foreclosure firms and affiliated title companies who sort of lobbied for this bill change based on the amount of time it was taking sheriffs to set sales at the height of the foreclosure crisis. So I think Trumbull County up north was taking a full year from the time you ordered the sale till they had a sale set. So they decided this would be a much faster way to sort of take it out of the sheriff's control and have private individual people getting these sales set more quickly. So that's when it came into effect. And I mean, there's a lot. In order to be a PSO, you have to be a licensed, oh, I'm going to mess this up. It's been a while. You have to be like a licensed auctioneer or a licensed real estate broker or something or both. But either way, that same bill required that the sheriff go from in-person sales, which I don't know if you ever went to one, but it was kind of fun. Every Friday, every whatever day of the week, every county would have their foreclosure sales at a specific location. Everyone would show up and they'd go through the properties one by one, and you out loud would bid. Now it's all electronic. So whether you buy it through a PSO or by a sheriff sale, you have to bid online.
That's really helpful. Yeah. And that's what people are talking about when they're talking about going to the courthouse steps, which is something that not a lot of people, even newer investors, don't even know that saying, they aren't familiar with it.
Yeah. And they're really fun. And we had, most of them, the auction's done by the sheriff. It's not like an auction that you would see on a TV with an actual auctioneer, except we had one county. I can't remember. It might've been Greene County, where he was like an actual auctioneer. So those were super fun because, everybody really got into it.
Fast paced. Yeah. A lot of energy. Yeah. And so what is the difference? One thing that you kind of mentioned in passing here is judicial versus non-judicial states. What is the difference?
So again, not an attorney, so this is not legal advice.
That goes for this whole conversation. This is all just a conversation. No advice here. Neither of us are attorneys.
Yes. And so Ohio is a judicial state, meaning the foreclosure goes through the court process. But there are non-judicial states. So when we take a loan out on a property, the collateral, the property is given as collateral by the mortgage, right? In other states that are non-judicial, instead of a mortgage, they do a deed of trust. That deed of trust grants a third party the power to sell the property, the power to sell the property in the event of default. So they don't have a court process. It's usually much faster. They might send you a couple of notices, and then they're selling that property. In Ohio, you file a complaint, you serve everyone with the complaint. Everyone has to wait 21 or 28 days after service to see if they file an answer. Once they've answered or not answered, then the plaintiff moves for judgment. Sometimes there's another hearing involved for judgment. Once that is granted, then the court allows you to move for sale. Once it goes to sale, we have a right of redemption in Ohio. So just because you are the successful purchaser at a sheriff sale doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the next owner of the property, because the person in foreclosure can come back post-sale and redeem it. Of course, you would get your deposit back, but that's all governed by the court. And non-judicial states are more notice, like mailing notices and posting notices on your door, but no judge, no court.
So I have a hypothetical for you that is related to the right of redemption. And again, not attorneys, but just speaking based on your knowledge. So let's say, for example, there is someone, we'll call him John. John is being foreclosed on by his lender. He stopped making payments. He's being foreclosed on. It goes through the whole process of foreclosure. And then we're in the right of redemption period. Does it have to be John? Well, I guess first, let's say, what has to happen for John to exercise his right of redemption?
He has to pay that loan off, whatever was in foreclosure. So if it's a tax foreclosure, he would have to bring all of his taxes current. If it's a mortgage foreclosure, he'd have to pay the mortgage off. And I think you were going to lead that into, does it have to be John who does it? Like, what if someone else comes to do it? The problem with someone else redeeming the property is John still owns it. So if you want to redeem the property for John, you better make sure John's on board to execute a deed to you once you do it. Otherwise, you've essentially just bought a house for John.
Right. And you'd want a title company involved in that process to make sure that everything gets recorded correctly.
Yeah. And I always tell people, I don't think anybody listens to me because they probably think I'm being super paranoid, but I always tell people, do not assume if you're buying something through a foreclosure that it's clear title. Do your due diligence. Like if you want to have your preferred title company do a title exam before you bid, or if that foreclosure is going to be a PSO, let the foreclosure, whoever handled the title work in the foreclosure, issue an owner's policy. It doesn't really matter if it should be clear title. If it's not, you've still got the problem. And again, I'm dealing with a property. I'm not dealing with it. I closed our file. There's nothing we can do. But we had a tax foreclosure handled by the prosecutor who I think just made a mistake and failed to name several liens. They referenced them, but they never served. It was the state of Ohio. There were child support liens. There were state tax liens. And they just never served them. They never named them as a defendant. They didn't serve them with the complaint. A third party bought it, paid for it, got the deed, now wants to sell it, and he can't. And when I contacted the prosecutor on that, he basically said, I don't know what we can do about this, but he should have done his due diligence before he bid. So
there's almost no end, and I keep saying it, to the number of things that can pop up. Title companies are just so important. Okay, so those are the questions that I had related to some of the foreclosure processes. One of the questions that I have is, and we don't have to get into too much detail here, but just generally speaking, how are taxes calculated and where can go people to find them on properties that they're looking to buy? Let's say it's a real estate investor.
So taxes are calculated, like every county auditor has an appraised value for a property, and they usually go through every 3 years or so and reappraise properties and determine if your taxes should be higher or lower based on your new appraised value. So that is who governs it. Taxes tend to be between 1% and 2% of the appraised value. But it's different in every municipality because there's levies that, police levies, fire levies, school district levies that could make those go up or down. But if anybody wants to see their taxes, almost everyone in Ohio, at least, has a county auditor or treasurer that's online. So you can go to that county treasurer, pull up a property by a parcel number, by a owner's name, or by a property address, and see what the current taxes are. Now, of course, that does not mean that's what those taxes are going to be next year, because they can go up or down at any given time. In specific counties, I know that they have a habit of, as soon as you buy something, if that purchase price is higher than what the auditor's value was, they're immediately going to raise up the appraised value. So next year, your taxes are going to be more.
Yeah. And that's one of the big items that I wanted to make sure that we touched on, was that difference in what the property taxes may have been when you're buying the property versus what they will be when you own it. Because that can have a significant impact on the numbers that you're running as an investor.
It can. I mean, and, especially depending on where you're buying, if you are buying in a place that maybe was like a distressed area that now has a tax abatement, that tax abatement might make your taxes $200 a year, but it could be ending next year. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's a resource from your perspective that maybe not a lot of people know about in real estate that could help them out as a real estate investor?
I don't know if this is a resource that not a lot of people know about, but I mean, all of the local RIAs, like join your real estate investor associations, talk to other people who do it. That's really just the best source of knowledge here. I mean, you can, go online, you can Google, you can read all you want, and I'm all about any education. But talking to people in real life who do it that I think is just the best way. So ask questions from your friends, ask for a mentor, see what you can do for someone. Maybe there's another real estate investor in your area that you know does a lot of volume and you want to learn from them. See if they are willing to teach you. And maybe that means you're going to do some rehab for them. You might be doing some trash out of houses in return for their teaching, but just ask and see what people are willing to help you with. Just don't be afraid to get out there and ask questions for sure.
I think that's a great advice. I think that's great advice. And I think it's one of the reasons that you and I have gotten along so well, because I definitely have no end to the number of questions that I have, and you being interested in doing your research, it's a good fit. So if I had the advice that I could supplement with September's, it's find somebody like September that you can talk to in real estate.
Well, thank you very much. One of my favorite things to do is to like help people and solve problems. So this industry is so specific. I mean, there's a lot of us here, but if you are not in the industry, it's kind of foreign. So I feel like all of us, that are in it, that have been doing it for a long time, we have all of this knowledge that nobody else in the world even wants. So, so when somebody comes in and they're curious about it, we love that. I mean, we want to help.
Awesome. What's one way that somebody can add value to you today, or what's something that you need right now?
I would say the number one thing I always need is feedback. We kind of pride ourselves at Plum on doing things the way you want us to. So we don't really want to be a title company that just does what we do. We want to be a title company that makes your job, your life easier. So what do you wish that your title company would do that they don't do? Is there an additional service, an additional method of communication? Like, I just always like to know what people are looking for, whether it's something that we do or we don't do. I love the feedback.
Yeah, it's huge. And communication in general, right? Especially with people that you're working with, just goes such a long way.
Yeah, I mean, communication from a title standpoint, I think it's probably the number one complaint I hear from people. They send a contract, they can't get a hold of the title company. 5 different people have been assigned, they left voicemails. And just like everything else in life, like communication is key. If you're talking, if you're telling people what you're doing, everybody's likely to be happier at the end.
Absolutely. I'd say for me personally, with having worked with a lot of title companies, communication is absolutely the biggest factor. It makes a huge difference in the entire experience. And a lot of times when we're working with clients, I'll just speak from our perspective, we're somewhat of a liaison between the title company and the buyer of the property. And so the more communication that the title company provides to us, the better that we can serve our clients. And it's a really nice cycle when done well, but when not done well, it can make things fall apart. I mean, some deals actually fall through because communication isn't there.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And I mean, especially even if an investor is involved on one side of the deal, lots of times if a consumer is the seller of a property or the buyer of a property, they don't know. So people tend to get really stressed out and anxious when they don't know what's going on. If they don't hear from someone, they assume there's a problem. They just kind of get panicked because buying a house or selling a house for most people is a really big deal. And just communicating with them and letting them know you're here, what to expect, what's next, here's how you call us, goes so far.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So before we wrap up, is there anything that I didn't touch on that you think is important for people to know?
I would say for investors specifically, and you might have asked this and I may have not said it, so sorry about that. Make sure you have your entity docs in order. Go to an attorney, get your LLC created properly, get an operating agreement. Make sure that you have that ready to go before you put a contract in on a house. The flip side of that is stop preparing your own deeds. They are a nightmare. People think they know how to do them. They don't. Homegrown deeds are the biggest thorn in my side that create the most problems in here every day. Like, it's worth a little bit of money to pay. Even if you don't want to have a title company close it, pay an attorney $100, $200 to get a deed done properly.
Yeah. Yeah. And this actually brought up something that I was going to ask earlier. And I know that you're very busy, so I'll let you go on this last question. Do you have to have an Ohio LLC in order to invest or purchase real estate in Ohio? Or can you have a California LLC, let's say, and invest in real estate in Ohio?
You do not have to have an LLC that is an Ohio LLC to do business in Ohio. You do have to be an active registered LLC somewhere that you can find in the country, or out of the country. We've actually had some Australian companies, which was different. But you have to have a valid active entity. If I cannot find a certificate of good standing for when you took title, it's not necessarily good ownership. So people also tend to think, no, it's not a problem because the county took my deed, they accepted it. They don't know. They're going to accept it because you gave it to them and it meets recording requirements. That does not mean that it meets all of the title requirements you need to actually own that property the way you intend to.
Awesome. That's super helpful clarification. It's a question I get a lot from out-of-state investors who give us a call. So I figured it was worth mentioning in here. So I appreciate you covering that. Last but not least, how can people get in touch with you, September?
They can always call the office, 937-329-9226. Or they can send an email to us. The best email address is closings@Plum Title, Ohio. And that's closings plural. So it's CLOSINGS at Plum, like the fruit, PLUM, title, TITLEOHIO.com.
Awesome. And I'll leave all that information down in the description below, so it's easier for people to find it. If you found this conversation helpful, then please share it with a friend, leave a review, and don't forget to check us out at sharpercapitalpartners.com and get in touch with September at the contact info below. September, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. It has been super, super insightful, and it always is when I get you on the phone or I get you on a podcast conversation like this. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Anytime. I love this. So thank you again for having me.
Of course. That's all we got for you, everyone, and we will see you in the next one.